I'm James Fratzke, and this is Leaders. There's this quote I really love by Sir Isaac Newton. It goes like this: "If I've seen further than others, it's by standing upon the shoulders of giants." So Leaders is an opportunity for you and I to stand on the shoulders of giants and learn from their journey. On each episode, I'll interview a proven leader, CEO, entrepreneur, or founder and unpack their story of success. If you're in the SEO or digital marketing world, then you've probably used Moz. And even if you haven't, you've probably seen Rand Fishkin, who is the founder and former CEO of Moz, pop up in your LinkedIn news feed at some point in your career. We taped our Leaders interview with Rand a few months back as he was getting ready to leave Moz and go on to his next big adventure. But we weren't able to really dig into exactly what that next adventure was quite yet, until recently when Rand actually announced to the world that he was officially leaving Moz in a very heartfelt, vulnerable blog post, which we've linked in the show notes. So we decided to get Rand back on the phone and dig into some of the exciting things going on in his life. This is part one of a two-part interview. Again, remember that this first part is more recent. These things have just happened in Rand's life. Part two, which is available right now as well on iTunes and Google Play, follows the typical Leaders podcast format, where we make an assumption that you don't know who the leader is, but you're there to learn from their lessons and stand on the shoulders of giants. So with that, please enjoy part one of our Rand Fishkin interview, and make sure you check out part two, which is also available for your listening pleasure as we speak. All right, so you recently left Moz, and you wrote this awesome blog post where you got pretty vulnerable and kind of put a few things out there. One of my favorite quotes was, on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is you were fired and escorted out of the building by security, and 10 is you left entirely on your own accord on wonderful terms, your departure, you ranked at a 4. That doesn't sound exactly pleasant, but I loved the analogy. Do you mind kind of digging into it a little bit? What did you mean by that?
Yeah, well, so I was trying to keep it vague enough because I don't think going into the details is particularly appropriate or helpful. And I was sort of asked by my leadership, not to delve into those details. So I'm trying to respect that, verbal promise. Yeah. Long story short is that personal and professional conflict, between myself and Moz's leadership led to my departure. I think, and that sucks, right? But when you're not the CEO and you get into a real, a true fight of that magnitude, you're going to be the one taken off.
Fair enough. I respect that response. Let me go back to the blog post real quick. You said that after leaving Moz, you felt sadness, heaps of regret, and a smattering of resentment. Now, we could certainly talk about those things, but I've always felt that it's more positive to talk about the future and things that we're excited about. So, Rand, what does the future have in hold for you?
Well, yeah, I wrote about that a little bit in the blog post as well, but three big things. One is I have a book coming out called Lost and Founder, and that is about the last 17 years of building Moz, sort of founding the company, transitioning from a services to a product firm. And, it tells a lot of stories from Moz, but the book is really trying to help founders and early stage companies and people who are going through these growth experiences to avoid making a lot of the same mistakes that we made and that I made. And that is, look, I think there's no way that I could or anyone could help you avoid a lot of the disaster that comes from startup world. There's a reason that 9 out of 10 startups fail, right? And it's just a very hard, risky enterprise. But if you can at least avoid making the same exact mistakes that we made, I think that'll be a win, and that's really my hope. My pitch to the publisher was sort of, look, Silicon Valley startup wisdom, wisdom in air quotes, biases founders to make a lot of dumb decisions and mistakes because we think it's what we're supposed to do, right? Things like, when you raise a big round of funding, you have to spend money quickly to get more growth quickly, right? That's why you raise that money. If you're not going to use it, it was a waste and it diluted you and your employees for no reason. So that's your job. But at actually a pretty dumb way to go. Spending a tiny bit of that money to experiment until you found things that work and you can pour cash into and know that you have,
Right.
feel confident that you can get a great outcome from, even if that takes you 2 to 5 years. That's actually a much better way to go. Much better way to go. And your investors will probably be supportive, but even if they're not, you're in charge, right? You're the CEO. You should run that thing. So just a lot of tactics for how to stay alive, how to avoid disaster, and some things that have worked really well for Moz, and some decisions we made that were really terrible that you don't have to make.
Well, I've always said there's two types of people in this world: the ones that learn from other people's mistakes, and the ones that have to pee on the electric fence themselves. So it sounds like you're helping.
Well, at least when you pee and you feel the jolt, you'll know what it is.
That's right.
So even if you have to make a mistake, you can be like, oh yeah, this is what that Rand guy was talking about. Look at that.
Right. You're wrapping words around it so you don't have to spend that extra time trying to post-mortem figure out, well, what the hell did I just do? You'll know exactly what happened. I love that.
Yes.
So when does the book go live, and kind of will you be doing any promotional stuff, going on book tours, anything like that? How does that work usually?
Yeah, so it comes out April 24th. In May, I will be visiting a few cities and doing some book events. So doing one here in Seattle, I think one in Portland, one in New York, and one in San Francisco. So not a ton of places, but a little bit. And then I am speaking at lots of conferences and events this year, and I think most of those that are after April 24th, anyone who goes to those events will probably get a copy of the book too. Yeah, I don't really know what it's like to be an author,
right,
rather than an entrepreneur. But yeah, that leads to my second thing that I'm doing post-Moz, which is starting a new company.
Right.
So I mentioned, I've got a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. I have something to prove. And I think, it's not just prove to other people, it's prove to myself, right? I need to be able to prove to myself that I can build another interesting, exciting company, even if it's very different. And I think this one will be. I don't plan to have 150 or 250 employees. My goal is to keep this one pretty small, not to raise any institutional capital, make a company that I can feel really excited and proud about, even if it's in a very different way.
Right. Now, the name of the company, and I hope I'm saying this right, SparkToro.
You got it.
Boom. There we go.
So, James, so the way I picked the name was I had to ask a bunch of people just to say, show them the written word and then say it. And everyone said it exactly the same. So then I was like, good, excellent. It's easy to pronounce.
It makes sense.
SparkToro. All right, great.
The capital T really helps. Okay, so a couple questions I want to dig into, because I think there's a couple interesting things we can unpack. But the first is, tell us a little bit about SparkToro. It's about influencers. It's about audience intelligence, but you're taking a little bit of a different slant on it.
Yeah. So I think the basic problem that I see, that we see over and over again, is that a lot of marketers engage in this practice, whether they're in-house or in an agency, engage in this practice where they try and figure out where their audience hangs out online, right? What blogs and websites do they read? Who do they follow on Twitter and Instagram? What Facebook pages do they like? What YouTube channels are they subscribed to? What podcasts do they listen to? What events do they go to? Right? Who are the influential people? Who are the sort of big minds that they follow in their field? And right now, that's a convoluted manual process that's done through a combination of lots and lots of Googling, and then clicking around to verify things, and surveying your audience, and interviewing them. And we think we can do a much better job of that with software, right? I mean, in an ideal world, if you imagine like the perfect product, you have, huge data set of everyone in the world and all the things that they've, liked and shared and visited online. And you can then do a big Venn diagram of, okay, every general contractor in the, greater Seattle area, turns out they all listen to this podcast, or, 7% of them listen to this podcast. And that's actually the highest percent of any podcasts that general contractors in the greater Seattle area listen to. And so that's the podcast that we want to advertise on, or that's the podcast we want to try and get a guest appearance on. Or we see that they all go to this particular event it's not even in Seattle. It's in Vancouver, BC, huh? All right, well, let's try and have a booth at that, Vancouver Expo, whatever it is. So that is what we're trying to get close to. And obviously, we won't have the perfect data set and the perfect product, but we're going to try and estimate something like that so that you can get real data about who does my audience pay attention to and how much and where should I be going and spending my time and energy and dollars and budget.
Right. So instead of just kind of randomly making guesses and kind of pointing at a map and saying, that's the one, we're going to do that, you're going to wrap some different ideas and algorithms around that, and not even algorithms, but I guess just pulling in raw data, taking those data sets and being able to paint a picture with them.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So trying to get a statistically significant sample set of the group, of any given group that you're trying to reach and target, and then saying, okay, they are, in these places, these levels of density. Therefore, you can reach that audience through these channels or through this influencer or through this event or podcast or what have you.
I want to dig into that a little bit more, but before I forget my other question, I want to ask you, because coming up with a brand name is really important and it's kind of difficult. And I used to interview rock bands, and the very popular question used to be like, well, how'd you come up with your name? And they never heard that before. So I'm going to ask you, and hopefully we get a better, more interesting response. But how do you come up with that name? I mean, there's a lot of pressure on coming up with something. It's definitely unique and different. What was the thought process?
Yeah, so this one was much less, what's something that I like and want to have, and much more, let me find something that fits all the criteria. And as long as I don't dislike it, we'll go with it. And so the criteria for me were 0 results in Google. You search for the name prior to, the launch of the website, and Google had no results. If you put SparkToro in quotes, no space, 0 results. Not a single thing had ever been associated with it previously. And I really wanted that because I wanted no pre-existing associations. I also wanted it because it makes it really easy to track the company's progress over time, right? So you can plug it into, a tool like Mention or TalkWalker, see all the places, or Google Alerts, right? And see every time you're mentioned, okay, there you go, look, we appeared here. You can see it in search volume through Google Trends and see, oh, okay, more and more people are searching for our brand. Great, that's excellent. And I think that becomes a lot harder if you have overlap with other names or other pre-existing ideas. The other thing was we wanted something that had no other concepts or associations around it, right? So SparkToro doesn't mean anything. No one could be like, well, I think they sound like they do blah. We wanted it to be like, nope, you have to go and figure it out. Right? You got to look it up. You can't just make an assumption that you think you know what that company does. You've got to look at it. And that was another important one. The .com domain name was available, right? Well, actually, it wasn't available. It was owned by my wife, but it was available to us.
Well, there you go. Wow. How did that negotiating go? No.
It was pretty easy, surprisingly easy.
Right.
Yeah. I just logged into her Google Sites account and pointed the DNS where I wanted.
Perfect.
We wanted a name that was pronounceable. So I don't know if you've seen the research. There's this fascinating research about ticker symbols and company names on Wall Street, right? So in the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange, and how the more pronounceable and obvious the ticker symbol and the business name is, the higher the stock price, controlling for all other variables.
Wow.
And I think that's just a human, it's just a human bias to processing fluency, right? We like things that are easy to say and easy to remember and easy to think about. And so we wanted a name that fit that, right? It could be said easily. It wasn't, overly long. It could be said in lots of languages, right? So if you're in most Western languages, in Japanese, in lots of other, cultures, you can say SparkToro, right? It's not overly Americanized or any other language. So, those are all considerations.
It does roll off the tongue.
Yeah, Yeah.
pretty good. So I like it a lot. So my other question I was going to ask about, you described what your guys' mission is with SparkToro and the problem that you're trying to solve. It's obviously different than the mission you were trying to solve for at Moz.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's some parallels and some similarities, but what do you think that experience at Moz, how does that equip you to kind of build out this software company with a totally different aim? But what are some of those things that you're going to take with you that are just going to make it easier, maybe set you up for success moving forward?
Well, I think that there's a lot of painful lessons learned, right? And some of those are about the forcing function of scale and of having venture dollars in, right? So Moz just published their annual report for 2017, and you could see the company did $47.5 million in revenue. About $5.5 million of that was EBITDA. So, profitable company with healthy amount of revenue, tens of thousands of customers. I think 36,000 or so customers. I think a lot of entrepreneurs would feel pretty good about that, unless you're a venture-backed company, in which case you can't look at those numbers without also looking at growth rate year over year, which I think was 11%. And that's the number that makes you go, nope, not an interesting venture business, right? Sort of a stuck in the middle company, and maybe we shouldn't have made that investment. So that's real tough, right? To find yourself in that sort of position. And I think that's one of the things that I want to be freed from in this next business, not to be forced to be a $1 billion outcome or a failure, but rather to have opportunities for varying degrees of success. I think by being very intentional about how I finance the company and how I lead it, and how I set up expectations, that's very possible. Another big lesson is focus. That's actually the last chapter of the book. I write about a bunch of the challenges Moz faced due to a lack of focus, and for me that just means I've had lots of interviews with customers about SparkToro. I've heard tons of problems that people have. It would be awesome to try and solve all those problems. For example, once people identify, okay, these are the influential people in publications that reach my audience, the next thing they want to do is, all right, now I want to do outreach to each of them, and I want to manage that contact flow and process, and I want to streamline it and get really good data out of that process of, are these people answering my emails or calls, and have I been mentioned on these sites, and with what frequency did I get a link from them, all that kind of stuff. That whole CRM contact management process, I'm not doing it. I know people need it. I know it's an important problem to solve. I realize that. I'm not going to do it. Just nope. Sorry, right? And I think saying no to things that are customer problems that you could solve is really important, so that you can focus on just the one thing, right? I want SparkToro to be known just as a place with superb audience intelligence, and great metrics around influencers of an audience, and not anything else.
I think that's one of the most difficult parts being in this space, especially dealing with enterprise level brands or small businesses, even more so the mom and pop businesses. They want so much, right? Well, why doesn't it do this, or why doesn't it do that? Because their imagination could imagine a world where maybe something could do that. Then they start looking at your product as inferior almost, because they're like, well, it should be able to do this, which is my favorite statement from a client. Like, it should be. Well, who the heck are you? How do you know what it should do?
Yeah, well, and I think saying no to that stuff so that you can be, absolutely superb at just one thing is a really powerful, important way to play. And I would urge a lot of entrepreneurs and businesses to think about that carefully, because it's so much easier to be known for being best in the world at something. And when you are best in the world at something, you're so much more attractive to other companies, as opposed to, well, what do? Well, they do a bunch of stuff. It's this and this. We use them for this. We don't actually use this part of their thing for this. I don't want that, right? I want to be, Netflix, not Amazon, right? So Netflix is not all things to all people. It's just you watch shows and movies.
Right.
It just has shows and movies. Like, what do you do with Netflix? You watch shows and movies. What do you do with Amazon? Well, They do a lot of things. And it's not that Amazon's bad, right? Amazon's a good example of going broad and succeeding. But
Yeah.
we do think, well, I host my website there, and you can also buy pretty much anything you want from them. They have a self-publishing books department. You can get groceries delivered to your house. Oh, they have a little speaker that lives in your house and answers questions for you. What?
Yes. I'm glad you didn't say her name, because if you did, then she'd start speaking to us right now, because I have one of her sitting right by me. But at any rate, yes, it is a lot of things, and it becomes very difficult to manage that, especially at scale. Obviously, Amazon is a super freak example, but a lot of people that are starting businesses I've seen, they aspire to be the Amazon, so they start trying to scale at an Amazon-like level. Oh, well, we're going to do everything like Amazon does, and Amazon didn't get there overnight. They started selling books, and they kind of grew from there. So,
well, and I think what people miss out on is they look at Amazon and they say it's possible,
right?
And I hate it's possible. What I want is tell me the odds. I want the odds. I want to know how many thousands of companies failed because they tried to do those same things, right? They tried to go broad. They were selling books, or whatever analogous process or product they were selling. They tried selling books and then expanding to everything else, and it killed them. And I bet there's 999 companies like that for every one of Amazon. And I don't like those odds.
Right. Neither do I.
That's not I don't want to play. I don't want to play that game. I want to play most startups fail, but actually 50% that did this made it through. All right, now I'm in. That's what I want.
All right, I want to end part one of this interview on this note, which is from your blog post, you said that one of the biggest lessons you've learned as the CEO of Moz is how to use empathy. And I think empathy is one of my favorite words of 2018. I think because a lot of people get it mixed up and don't necessarily understand the definition, which is basically put yourself in other people's shoes. That's what empathy is, being able to put yourself in other people's shoes. So how did you use empathy, Rand? How does it apply to leadership? Tell me a little bit.
Well, so I think that the crucial thing for a CEO or a founder to be able to do is to put yourself in the shoes of two different kinds of people: your customers and potential customers and your employees, right? And you need to be able to feel the feelings. I think empathy is about feeling feelings, right? So I can feel what it's like as a customer to have this frustrating, challenging manual process problem of identifying influential publications and people that reach my audience so that I can go do good targeting, with my marketing efforts like that. I feel that frustration. I know what that's like. I've watched people do it. I've had them send me their spreadsheets. I've seen all the inaccuracies in there and, the surface level metrics and all this crap. And I know how they feel, right? They feel embarrassed by their research. They feel frustrated that the process takes so long. They feel stymied, right? Like just stopped when they can't reach deeper into an audience and find the right affinities for that group. And then for employees, right? You need to be able to feel the frustration of your employees. What is holding them back from delivering their best work? Why do they work for you? Why do they want to work for you? Why do they want to leave? What makes them leave? What inspires them to have great ideas? What holds them back? What's helping or harming them this week? And is that something that is, something you need to consider in terms of their performance? Or is this a one-time thing that you need to forgive and let go because we are all human beings and have personal lives outside of work? And what if your parents, if your mom just passed away, maybe you're not going to deliver your best week of work, and maybe your CEO should not worry about that, right? Those kinds of things. I think that both those kinds of empathy will help you deliver a better company, a better product, better experience, have happier employees, all those things.
Rand, this is part one of our interview that we're releasing to the world, but part two we actually taped a few months back, and there were just so many lessons that you shared that I think people can get excited about, like not getting caught up in the hype of Silicon Valley or VC funding, not getting caught up in the hype of a lifestyle company versus a real company, understanding that you can only do, and this is something that I've talked to a lot of people about after our interview, you can only do two things really well, right? So you can't be a great dad, a great business owner, a great husband, and have a hobby on the side. Like those things just it's not gonna go well for you,
Nope.
right? Like, and so another great life lesson from Rand, empathy. I think that's such a great place to kind of end. All right, a quick recap before we wrap up part one of this interview. Some exciting things going on with you right now, Rand. First, your book, Lost and Founder, is going to be released soon, if not already by the time people listen to this podcast. Lost and Founder is a painfully honest field guide to the startup world. And then you have SparkToro, which is this very exciting new company that you're starting. And I know in your blog post you mentioned that it's going to take a little bit of time for you and your team to put together exactly what that product offering looks like. But I'm very excited to kind of dig into that and get my hands on it as well. So, Rand, a very exciting time to be alive.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, James, I really appreciate you having me on the show, man. This has been great.
Hey guys, quick note before we leave. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Leaders. If you liked what you heard, please leave us a review. As we try to grow the show and invite more leaders to share their stories, every subscribe, rating, and review really helps expose the podcast to new ears. And a quick thank you to today's guest and our sound engineer, Jonathan Costco. Until next time, I'm James Fratzke. This episode of Leaders is brought to you by Fratzke Media. We're a digital marketing consultancy focused on leading brand transformations through digital storytelling. Our portfolio of clients ranges from venture capital firms to Fortune 500 companies. For more information, go to fratzkemedia.com and fill out one of our contact forms. We'd love to tell you more about how we can lead your brand's digital transformation.